This was found about 25 years ago, recently placed in our possession, the Creation Evidences Museum. It is a fossilized finger. You see, what's the difference? The evolutionary community tried to make out of this tooth a life form that didn't exist, that could not be matched, intermediate, in between. That's not what we're trying to do. We're taking a fossil that perfectly matches a living form today. And if it matches perfectly, we can say with academic assurance that it came from that life form. This finger, first I need you to examine it. Do you see what certainly appears to be a fingernail? Cuticles? Yes. Do you see what appears to be the medial joint? A finger joint from the medial joint forward. Inside, you see replaced material that matches the bone marrow, the bone shaft, even the epidermy and the skin texture. Well, if those individuals could be coalified a mile and a half down in the coal mines, before the coal mines were there, and if dinosaur tissue, flesh and skin have been preserved intact in fossilized form, that is, they've been replaced, certainly it's possible for a human finger to be, right? Well, let's see if this is masculine or feminine. We men have a rather blunt finger terminus normally. Let's see your index finger or any finger. Would you say that's a fair match? Where's the camera? Is that a fair match? I ask you to judge. Is that a fair match? Would you say that certainly appears to be a human finger?
Yes.
Okay. What does this one artifact do to the theory of evolution? In every class, to the last man, simply grinned and said, it totally destroys the concept of evolution. That fossil. And you get to see it. Now, I have another fossil. Each of these is priceless. This was found, this hammer was found 56 years ago, this June, totally encased in Ordovician stone. I took the hammer to Battelle Lab in Columbus, Ohio. Dr. Otho Perkins, a leading evolutionary scholar, looked at it that morning and he said, we're going to have to rewrite Earth history as a result of this. It's genuine. There's no question it's genuine. And he's an evolutionary scholar. And he said, maybe it dropped out of the sky as a meteorite. And then he explained, he said, maybe it fell as a meteorite and some smart Indian carved it. Well, there's a problem there because it has a shaft in one end. Pretty hard to carve a shaft in it. But not only that, there's another problem. He said, you'll know if it's meteoritic in origin because all meteoritic iron has nickel in it, and that's true. All iron that falls out of the space, and there are little globules of iron that fall out of space, and big globules of iron. The object is just not to be standing in the place where they fall. So he said, perhaps it fell out of the sky as a meteorite and some smart Indian found it and carved that. He said, you'll know at Battelle Lab, where you're going to be this afternoon. We were scheduled to be there that afternoon and were. He said, you'll know because all meteoritic iron has nickel in it. That afternoon, I took it to Battelle. We did a scanning electron microprobe elemental analysis. That is a beam of electrons streaming down into it to see what it was made of. Turns out to be 96.6% iron, almost pure iron, 96.6% iron, 0.74% sulfur, less than 1% sulfur, 2.6% chlorine. How much nickel? 0.0, none. No nickel. Didn't fall out of the sky. It came, the original material came from the earth. Incidentally, the biblical record says in Genesis chapter 4 that before the flood, in that pre-flood context. A man named Tubal-Cain taught artisans in the use of brass and iron. This is an artisan's hammer. If you look closely, the cavity, don't touch it, but if you look closely, the cavity surrounding that head, the cavity has a circular configuration, meaning that there was a mallet head sleeve on the top of that. That's what you use for working delicately in metals. You pulverize one end and then beat them out into contour with the other. It appears that that's an artisan's hammer used for working in metal. Does that match the pre-flood context? Yes. First of all, it has 96.6% iron, 0.74% sulfur, 2.6% chlorine. We can compound chlorine with ferric material in liquid form and in powder form, but we cannot compound chlorine in with metallic iron. To do so would require the total removal of ultraviolet radiation, because we can't compound it with iron because oxygen is so aggressive because of the ultraviolet penetration that the oxygen grabs the iron and doesn't give the chlorine a chance to do so. In liquid form we can do it because the oxygen can't get in through the liquid, but we can't do so in metallic form. So in order to do this, you're going to have to totally remove the ultraviolet penetration. How do you do that? You've got to have a shield around the earth, a firmament canopy around the earth. In other words, to fabricate this at all requires the canopy. The whole environment has to be right. In addition to that, there is a little area there where 56 years ago, when they first found it, chipped the top of the stone off. The material was already fossil coated. That's not rust, that's fossil coating. They took a file and seared through that coating to see what the metal looked like underneath. It was shiny bright. Professor Ian Taylor called me from Toronto, Canada. He said, we've observed a documentary that you did, and he said, in our opinion at the lab here at the university in Toronto, this is a genuine pre-flood artifact. I said, scientifically, how do you know? He said, because if it will not rust where it was seared, and he said rust forms in nature Fe2O3 or Fe3O4, and he said if it will not rust, there has to be iron oxide on the surface of it, and that has to be straight FeO. I said, how do you make FeO? He said, there's only one way. We have to have a chamber with at least 2 atmospheres of pressure shielded from ultraviolet radiation. Now we come to what has been at the heart of the controversy at Glen Rose. In 1908, the first dinosaur tracks were found after a flash flood ripped up a ledge of limestone. When the waters went down, there were some huge chicken tracks there. But they weren't chicken tracks, turned out to be dinosaur tracks. That was 1908. In 1910, a fellow named Charlie Moss examined the riverbed after another flash flood had ripped up another ledge of limestone. He found perfectly preserved, depressed human footprints among the dinosaur prints. 1940, the Burdick print was cut out. We have now found the layer of stone from which it came. We've not found the immediate area, but we found the stone which matches it perfectly, from inclusions, everything about it. So it does match the Glen Rose limestone in at least that one layer, and finding that layer is all we needed. If you'll observe this closely without touching it, you'll find the great toe, second, third, fourth little toe, the ball, the flange, the medial arch, the heel calcaneus section, the lateral arch, even the slight bulge at the base of the 5th metatarsal. That means that it could only have been made by a very modern man or woman. It's feminine, by the way. It's 14 inches long. The lady stood about 7'3" or 4". I say about. She could stand as tall as she wanted to, and nobody could disprove. How do we know it's feminine? Because of the narrowness of the heel in relation to the rest of the track, and because of the relative narrowness of the great toe. You ladies have a more narrow great toe and a more narrow heel than a man. How many knew that? a couple, one man, two ladies. So that indicates in all probability that it was feminine. The evolutionist printed a 12-page article or 10-page article in Natural History magazine. I was mentioned 12 times in it, not favorably, and that doesn't bother me in the least, because the work we're doing is controversial only to those who refuse to accept the truth. And they have admitted in print that if we can verify human occupation among dinosaurs, the theory of evolution's in trouble. Well, we've done that, but whether we could do that or not, the theory was in trouble to begin with. Now, recently, they stated in Natural History magazine that it's too perfect. It's all 5 of the toes. It's obviously a carving. Recently, we had it sectioned. Let me back up a paragraph. About 20 years ago, they sectioned it across the flange and the ball of the footprint at Loma Linda University, assuming, since that's the deepest area, that's not quite the deepest, the heel's slightly deeper, but since that's one of the deepest areas, that would show the lamination. It did not show lamination. So, even creationists said, must be a carving. Well, recently we determined, now the museum has it permanently, but Dr. Clifford Burdick is 95 and he's not going to be with us much longer, so we wanted to section it further before he died, so we would be able to let him know that he was vindicated before he died. Well, in our research at Glen Rose, we found some rather unusual things. In forward locomotion, you don't walk straight. Did you know that? You waddle. You waddle with a spring. So do I. I used to have more spring in my waddle than I do now. We actually place weight on the heel, transfer it to the lateral outside, transfer that weight to the ball and great toe, and transfer that forward. And as we do, the great toe is extended, but the other 4 toes curl to give us part of the spring. And that curl is mandated by the muscular structure to which it's attached. You're all orchestrated. Everything was orchestrated. Did you get that through the lectures today? Everything was balanced to begin with. Now things are out of balance. Well, if the other 4 toes are splayed, that is, they're extended out, that means the girl was not walking in normal forward locomotion. That means she actually was turning. And we realized that she was, in all probability, turning left. Well, that means that the greater pressure would not be under the flange, but would be under the heel and under the toes. Because if you're turning left, what you actually do is balance the area to begin with. You balance the area at the flange, and you actually place the weight on the splayed toes, and you keep that weight on the forward portion of the foot and turn like this. Try it sometime. It'll work. That's the only way it will work comfortably. So the greater pressure would be on the toes, not on the ball of the foot, because in the turn, you actually would level the weight on the balls, but keep the weight on the toes to begin with, and then press it down even further. So we section the heel. Sure enough, the lamination pressure lines are there. It's genuine. Then we section twice across the toes. We found that not only under the toes do you have the lamination pressure ridges, but under the great toe you have a very deep one. It depresses down and then it shifts to the left. 2 separate lamination series. So the lady was turning left like that. First she balanced her weight forward, and then she pulled it like that. That's exactly what you do if you're turning left and you're sensitive. You actually pull it so that some of the weight would press to the side. So I'm saying that this is a genuine human footprint made among dinosaur footprints. Now, have you learned anything? Now let's take your questions. We have come to a special time that I always enjoy, and that is checking your questions if you have any. You've seen actual tangible evidences. Do you understand why we claim that in the work of that little museum at Glen Rose, the research has actually shown that the theory of evolution is falsified. It's falsifiable, and we have falsified it, showing that it is in error. Okay, young man, what question do you have?
Yes, Plato, in his writings, wrote about a city that sunk into the sea about 9,000 years beforehand, called Atlantis. Do you think that had anything to do with the flood? Do you think it sunk in about like that? Do you think it sunk in during the flood, or what?
If Atlantis existed,
Right, which it may not have.
it may not have, and these are intelligent questions. If Atlantis existed, in my opinion, it would have been destroyed, not at the time of the flood, it's post-flood. And remember that immediately following the flood, man had superior technology. Civilizations appear as superior civilizations quickly. I mean, in the record that is now decipherable by archaeological research, not paleontological research. What I've been talking to you today about is paleontology. That's the fossil record. But in archaeology, which is essentially on the surface of the globe, very sophisticated cultures appear. I did a doctoral dissertation in Magdalenian age, which is supposed to go back like 100,000 years ago. They found a settlement, and they found some sketches, and they were so precise and so sophisticated they actually had to hide them in the basement of a museum. Later they were found, and they were expressed, but the academic community in general said, well, we can't answer those, let's not teach those in the class. What did they find? They found a sketch of a lady with a hat on, and the hat had a sophisticated turn. Ladies like to wear hats, you know. I don't know why, they just like to wear hats. Like a tam, sophisticated turn. The lady was wearing a blouse and a pantsuit. She had a belt on. She was wearing boots. And the lady had a purse by her side which had a fold and a button. All of that was drawn onto a piece of rock. And that's supposed to be 100,000 years old? Well, what that shows is that which is rather old, dating back near the flood, but has been destroyed in archaeological records, was very sophisticated. Atlantis, in my opinion, if it existed, and it possibly did, was sophisticated but represents time after the flood, the time when most of the mastodons were destroyed. In my opinion, most of the mastodons were destroyed after the flood. Remember, immediately following, okay, see if you can put all this together. Immediately following the flood, we still had a canopy. We didn't have a firmament. Do you know the difference between the two? Firmament had the metallic crystalline constituency. It was superconductive, but the electromagnetic field of the earth would still have held enough of the water in suspension that we would have a canopy. So we would have a shielding from the shortwave radiation. We would still have more pressure than we have today. The pressure didn't all go at one time. Quite a bit of it did, but not all of it. We'd still have some of the effects. So with the superior genetic structure of all of those specimens, the elephants, mastodons, essentially the same thing, except for a little hair difference. Some of us have hair, some of us don't.
Thank you.
Well, wait, the answer's not fully there. Some of you have hair, some of you don't. Some elephants have hair, some don't. There was apparently a tremendous tidal wave that was caused from eruptions under the sea that not only inundated, totally devastated Atlantis if it existed, but it went across most of the continents. And what we find from the mastodons, some might suggest that they were destroyed in the flood. They certainly were there before the flood. But suffocation, distended areas of certain parts of the body which occur when we're suffocating, is seen in some of the mastodons. So I think Atlantis would not have been destroyed in the flood, but post-flood in a great tidal wave that essentially covered the globe, not at one time. Thank you. Good question.
Thank you.
Hi. First, let me say, like you, I'm a skeptic, and I really like to. I've heard about this before. I read your book, and it's excellent. But one thing I was wondering is the denser atmosphere that existed before the flood that allowed the giant dinosaurs to fly. How would that have affected, say, other birds like the albatross or these other large birds that have a lighter bone structure? Would it be like, you can't take an ultralight plane and fly it real fast, dynamic pressure tears it apart. Would these birds have had to struggle through the air, or how has that been addressed in any of these studies?
Okay. It has been in principle, not in actual studies, but in this hyperbaric chamber that we're building at Glen Rose, we will be able to address much more of that with actual studies, sound qualities, and studies of buoyancy and so forth. Hyperoxygenation of the water table as well as hyperoxygenation of the blood plasma. Now, depending on the design and intent of a physical creature, the intensity, the added pressure, actually had a commensurate climate with no winds. You might have gentle breeze, but no wind, so you wouldn't have any violence. It would be much easier to fly. So the albatross and others which have very light bone structure, avian creatures actually absorb air into their bones. They would be able to fly much easier, and since there was no violence, there wouldn't be wind to actually drive them down. They could simply fly quite readily and with a peaceful ecological context. Depending on their need, they probably would not continue to soar or dive like the avian reptiles would, but they would have more peaceful nature to their flight.
Also, where can I get a pair of those pink glasses?
Okay, yes, very good question. And we make no money on those glasses. We don't make money on anything, by design or otherwise. But I shared the formula after all of these years of research. I went to Cleburne Eye Clinic to ask them to make me a pair of glasses and see what they would do. I had no idea what they would do. So they made these glasses, and I was very surprised at the results, the positive results. So a number of other people who have seen the glasses or have visited the museum have requested them. Cleburne Eye Clinic, Cleburne, Texas. If you just call Cleburne Eye Clinic, Cleburne, Texas, and say, I want to talk about some pink glasses. They have hundreds of people call. They know exactly. They'll say, oh yes, the Dr. Baugh glasses. Yeah, that's what they call them. I call them the pre-flood glasses. So you just call them, and I don't know what prices they are. You can have prescription put in them. That's no problem, and they will cost, with prescription, approximately what normal glasses would cost at an optometrist here locally. Cleburne Eye Clinic, Cleburne, Texas. Any other questions? Yes.
I have two questions. One, in the fossil record, are there records of like mosquitoes and chiggers and wasps and hornets and all those things that are real pests?
Yes. Let me answer that before you get to the next one. Cockroaches in the fossil record exceeded 12 inches in length. But not to worry, no problem. With the hyperoxygenation of the aqueous medium, the water, and the hyperoxygenation of viscous fluid context, that totally removes the threat of anaerobic bacteria. When you remove the bacterial threat of cockroaches, they're just cute little bugs. Well, big bugs. They have found wasps in the fossil record, spiders, unchanged for 300 million years in the fossil record, if those hundreds of million years exist, and they do not. But essentially all the phylic forms, vertebrate and non-vertebrate, are found in the fossil record, but they're all bigger. They have found dragonflies, which today have a 4-inch wingspan, with a 36-inch wingspan. We're going to put some dragonflies and butterflies in the chamber. We're not going to put any mosquitoes in there. Now, the reason being, we don't want them to get out. As long as they're kept in the chamber, no problem with mosquitoes. In the pre-flood world, mosquitoes were no problem. Why not? It is the female mosquito that bites, and she bites just before she lays her eggs. She bites out of nutritional need. She's supposed to get her nutrients from the fruit supply, but she can't get enough nutrients in our current ecological imbalance. So what she does is go for your blood. Well, before the flood, there was no need for that whatsoever. She was satisfied already. Next question.
I was also wondering, I read the Genesis flood, and I was wondering if you could explain how the fossils were arranged the way they were. And
good question. This arrangement is philosophic. You don't find the fossil record like this anywhere on the face of the globe. You find these fossils, and therefore they're assigned an age in excess of 300 million years because they appear to be primitive compared to man. They're not. They're simply distinctively different. You'll find these fossils, and they're assigned a separate age. These fossils, and they're assigned a separate age. To make this appear to be true, if you were to find this anywhere on the face of the globe, it would have to be in excess of 50 miles thick. You don't find it anywhere on the face of the globe. You find contradictions to all of it. You find human occupation here, you find human occupation here, you find some of these way up here. You find trilobites on the tops of mountains, by the way. You find some of these primitive crustacean forms on the tops of mountains. They're not primitive, they're just distinctive. However, if you did have one continuous column, while you would find anomalies, because they all existed at the same time, you'd find some human beings caught in a coal bed and coalified in Virginia, West Virginia, way down here. But in general, you wouldn't find man down there. In general, you would find, under natural hydraulic water sorting circumstances, you would find that sort of sorting because of the hydrology, because of the specific gravity, because of geological zonation, and because of reflex. These creatures are seagoing. These are less mobile than these. You would certainly find them caught first in the rocks, wouldn't you? You'd find these caught again. They found some sharks in the Cleveland Shale, supposedly right around here. Those sharks continued to swim until they're pressed and pressed and pressed with the context, and they're 1/8 of an inch thick. The whole shark, 1/8 of an inch thick. Well, you would find certain plants that had been rooted up and caught there. Then you would find amphibious creatures which like the water but like the land as well. So they wouldn't run from the waters. Then you would find creatures that like the waters but could run a little better. Then you would find mammalian creatures such as these, and avian creatures, birds, which had the ability to get away from the water and the instinct to want to get away from the water. Among those, you would find these forms, even if they got caught at the same time as these. You know what happens to a human body and a cow's body when they die in water? They first bloat and then they float. So even if a mammalian form were caught down here, it would have a tendency to float until it got up there.
With the decay of the electromagnetic field, how much longer do we have before the Earth becomes uninhabitable?
15 minutes or so. I think we're already beyond the point of danger. But, and the Environmental Protection Agency has said that in a matter of decades, 1 out of 3 will die of cancer introduced inadvertently from ultraviolet penetration. The figures show that in 3,500 years, there will be essentially none of it left. In just 3,500 years. But now, they're not going to print that. Panic. It means everyone would have to turn to a creator and say, you're the only hope I have. Well, he is the only hope we have. But that is, if it's decreasing linearly, we have 3,500 years. If it's decreasing exponentially, we have a little longer. But it is already so weak, it's damaged terribly. If we had other sources of radiation coming in other than the normal sources, if there were supernovas close at hand and additional radiation were here, men would have to live in the dens and caves of the earth to be sheltered from the radiation. Well, that's what the biblical record says is going to happen very soon.
What can you tell us about Noah's Ark?
Other than what's classified?
Other than what's classified.
It's there. What does it look like? It looks like what George Hagopian described it when he saw it in 1902 as a boy. He died in 1972. The ark is there. It's probably in 4 components at this time. It's amazing that it is that much intact. And there are slivers of it that have gone further down the mountain. Hopefully before the year's out, you'll see some special photographic documentation of it.
With the greenhouse effect that you're talking about in the giant plants and the fruitful abundance, how did you coordinate that with, in Genesis, where it says, "Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat it all the days of your lives. It will produce thorns and thistles, and by the sweat of your brow you'll eat your food until you return to the ground."
Okay. It appears that thorns and thistles were at that point mutationally added to the genetic stock of certain plants. Before that, the roses had no thorns. Before that, the thistles wouldn't cut you if you walked through them. But nature is there said to reveal God's curse on man because of his sin, and nature does reveal that. Nature suffers because of man's sin. Nature is inanimate. It is not self-realizing. Man is. So the fact that the curse is placed there, there was no toil before that. The fruit produced for man, you just had to go out and pick it. Didn't have to do anything, but now there is toil. Now that does not mean that the plants ceased to grow, but it meant that there was more difficulty in harvesting them, and it specifically says thorns and thistles, meaning you had to be careful of underbrush. One more question.
You talked about the radiation deteriorating like the electromagnetic field. What type of effect would, say, nuclear warheads exploding, the radiation from that, how would that affect the...
Today?
Yeah.
Terrible effects.
Like
nuclear warheads.
What would it take? Like how many to really affect it in a great way?
I'm really not qualified to answer that, but one would have a fallout effect, an immediate radioactive effect where it hit, and a fallout effect on all of mankind, because there's a buildup, and we have the jet stream that would carry nuclear radiation extensively. Now, I'm for strong America. I'm not for disarming. But at the same time, I'm for control and conversion of the real problem, and that's the heart of man. I hope you've learned today. It's been a delight to be with you. Thank you so much.